a tiny island in the Gulf of Guinea could tell you stories of daring explorers, colonial gambits, near-forgotten kingdoms, and a nation ruled by one of the world's longest-standing leaders. Welcome to a place where volcanic peaks rise above emerald forests, where battle-scarred history meets vibrant culture, and where the heart of Africa beats offshore in a city called Malabo, ready to uncover the secrets of Equatorial Guinea, a land of mystery, wealth, and resilience. Our story begins right out in the Gulf of Guinea. Imagine a Portuguese explorer named Fernando Po sailing the seas around 1472. He sights this stunning island and initially calls it Formosa, which means beautiful. Today we know it as Bioko, but for centuries it bore his name, Fernando Po. A little further south, another island was spotted, probably by a fellow explorer named Rui de Sequeira, sometime between 1472 and 1475. And it was named Annobon. For a while, Portugal held the keys here, thanks to the 1494 Treaty of Tordesillas, which essentially gave them exclusive trade rights in Africa. But come 1778, Portugal and Spain made a big move with the Treaty of El Pardo, and it's kind of like a colonial swap meet. Portugal ceded the islands of Fernando Po and Annobon, plus some rights on the mainland coast to Spain. Why? Because Spain desperately wanted its own source of enslaved people in Africa to send to Spanish America. In return, Spain confirmed Portugal's vast control over what is now Brazil. But here's the thing, the Spanish attempt at occupation was short-lived and frankly, a bit disastrous. Yellow fever absolutely decimated their forces on Fernando Po, and they withdrew by 1781. And the mainland? Well, that remained unoccupied by any European power for decades. Fast forward to the early 1800s. The world was changing and Britain had abolished the slave trade in 1807. Now the Royal Navy needed a strategic base to suppress the ongoing transatlantic slave trade. And guess what? Fernando Po was perfectly located to monitor the entire slave coast. So in 1827, the Spanish, still mostly absent, leased out bases to the British at Port Clarence, which would later become Malabo and San Carlos Bay. The British ended up becoming the de facto administrators, and they resettled many formerly enslaved people there, folks from Sierra Leone, Jamaica, and the Caribbean. And by 1843, their anti-slavery patrol moved to Sierra Leone, and the Spanish decided to make a second, more permanent effort. In 1858, they expelled the British Baptists who had set up shop. Then, by the 1870s, the island even became a penal settlement for Cubans deemed troublemakers. Then came the late 1800s, the infamous scramble for Africa. Compared to its neighbours like France and Gabon, and Germany and Cameroon, Spain was weak. So naturally France took advantage, and when the dust settled with the 1900 Treaty of Paris, the Spanish mainland claim, which became known as Rio Muni, was confined to its current, rather small borders. As a result, Fernando Po and Rio Muni were formally grouped together and later renamed Spanish Guinea in 1904. Though that's far from the end of the story, because in 1959 the region became two Spanish overseas provinces, and in 1963 a plebiscite granted them some autonomy as Equatorial Guinea. As you can imagine, the push for full independence was unstoppable. And in 1968, a new constitution was approved, elections were held, and on October 12, 1968, the Republic of Equatorial Guinea was born. The first president was Francisco Macías Nguema. And this is where the story takes a dark turn, because almost immediately, Macías consolidated power. By 1972, he pushed through a constitution that named him president for life. Then, just a year later, he had absolute control, clamping down on the press, stopping foreign travel, and even renaming Fernando Po to Macías Nguema Bioko Island. His rule became a brutal reign of terror, leading to mass arrests, summary executions, and an exodus of citizens. The world, including Amnesty International, protested. Fortunately, the terror finally ended in 1979 when his nephew, Lieutenant Colonel Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo, led a military coup and overthrew and executed Macías. And I know what you're thinking. Did this usher in a new era of freedom? Well, not quite. Obiang's rule, which has lasted for decades, has been the subject of intense international criticism for its oppressive nature. While a new constitution in the 80s and the introduction of a multi-party state in the 90s promised democracy, elections have been consistently marred by charges of fraud. So, where does that leave us today? Obiang has been continually re-elected by massive margins, most recently in 2022, though the credibility of those results is always questioned by international observers. That was quite the heavy history lesson, right? So now let's lighten the mood a bit and talk about something I absolutely love: geography. Equatorial Guinea is tucked right into the curve of Central Africa, and just as the name suggests, it sits right above the equator. It's not a big country, it's actually one of Africa's smallest ones. Its land area is about 28,051 square kilometres, or roughly 10,831 square miles. But when you count its total ocean territory, known as the Exclusive Economic Zone, or EEZ, it balloons out to an impressive 331,560 square kilometres, or 128,015 square miles, making it a geographically significant nation in the region. The biggest thing to wrap your head around is that this country is split into two distinct parts, and they don't even touch. You have the main continental chunk called Rio Muni. This is where most of the land is, and it's bordered by its two neighbours, Cameroon to the north and Gabon to the south and east. Then you have the islands, the star of which is Bioko, our former Fernando Po. This is where the story gets really fascinating because the capital city, Malabo, is located right here. Can you believe it? Your country's political heart is sitting about 236 kilometres, or 147 miles, offshore from the rest of the country, just off the coast of Cameroon. So let's see what it's all about, shall we? The island of Bioko is dominated by massive, rugged volcanic mountains. It's here that you find the highest point in the entire country, Pico Basile, which is a majestic 3,011 metres, or almost 10,000 feet tall. It's quite the contrast to the mainland region of Rio Muni, which is flatter near the coast but quickly rises to become a series of heavily wooded hills as you move inland. Speaking of woods, get this. This country is a green machine. A phenomenal 58% of the country is covered in dense tropical forests. And if you were flying over it, you'd see a lush, uninterrupted canopy. While those dense forests are important for timber, the real resource lies beneath the seafloor, specifically petroleum and natural gas. These are by far the most notable natural resources, but beyond oil and gas, the country is also rich in other mineral resources like gold, bauxite, and even diamonds. It's a compelling picture, isn't it? The sheer geography, with the isolation of the capital, the natural wealth, has dictated so much of its political and economic future. Which brings us to our next topic. So, remember how we wrapped up the history with the long rule of President Obiang? Well, that is the single most important fact dictating Equatorial Guinea's life today. Let's tackle the political reality first because it's the foundation of everything else. Simply put, Equatorial Guinea is dominated by one man and one party. President Teodoro Obiang Nguema Mbasogo has been in power since 1979, making him one of the world's longest-serving non-royal heads of state. And his party, the Partido Democrático de Guinea Equatorial, or PDGE, is completely dominant. Now, why does this system endure? It's pretty stark. The country maintains power through a very repressive internal security apparatus, meaning there's little room for opposition, and political competition is effectively stifled. Looking ahead, experts expect the PDGE, led by Obiang, or more likely, his designated successor, who many believe will be his son, to remain firmly in control for the foreseeable future. Despite this, there's an underlying tension, as there are always internal power struggles within the ruling family regarding who will eventually take the throne. This makes the political stability feel quite fragile, even as the regime looks outwardly strong. So, how do all these affect the economy? Good question. Well, Equatorial Guinea's economy is almost entirely dependent on one thing: hydrocarbons or oil and natural gas. But just so you understand the bigger picture, let's take a closer look at the numbers. The country's GDP was valued at about $12.77 billion in 2024. While that sounds like a lot, it represents only 0.01% of the entire world economy. And here's the crazy part about their dependence. Hydrocarbons are responsible for an incredible amount of the country's wealth. They make up 42% of the GDP, account for a whopping 95% of all exports, and generate 90% of the government's total revenue. When a single commodity dictates 9 out of every $10 the government takes in, you know you have a high-stakes, volatile economy. But on the national ledger, despite the dependence on oil, the budget has managed to stay relatively stable. The country actually recorded a small budget surplus of 0.8% of GDP in 2023, though that was a sharp drop from the 11.9% surplus in 2022. So now the biggest long-term challenge for Equatorial Guinea is this: they must stop depending so much on oil. And to secure a stable future, the country needs to rehabilitate its financial sector and drastically reduce the share of hydrocarbons in the economy. They have a huge opportunity to better utilize their natural capital, like those massive forests we talked about, perhaps even by implementing a regional carbon exchange with other countries in the Congo Basin. But that's a completely different topic, one we have to keep our eyes peeled for. For now, let's dive into the vibrant world of Equatorial Guinean culture, where ancient customs collide beautifully with the Spanish legacy. The foundation of this culture starts with the people themselves, who are organized into 5 main ethnic groups, each with its own traditions and cuisine. We have the Fang, the largest group, primarily located on the mainland, Rio Muni. Then over on Bioko Island, you have the Bubis, who are the original inhabitants. Following them, the coastal regions are home to the Ndawi people, and the other key groups are the Bisios and the Anabanese. This ethnic diversity spills directly into the arts. Take music, for example. The Fang are famous for the mvet, a unique instrument that's a cross between a zither and a harp, sometimes featuring up to 15 strings. And get this, the music played on the mvet is so specialized that it's written in a form of musical notation only learned by initiates of the Bibom Mvet Society. Then, when it comes to dance, you have 2 major styles, the balele, which originated with the Bubi tribes and is still performed along the coast and on Bioko around Christmas, and the more traditional and lively Ibanga dance from the Fang. Beyond music, the art world shines. Traditional sculpture and mask making are central, and the country boasts internationally acclaimed artists. The most famous is undoubtedly Don Leandro Mbomio Nsue. This incredible sculptor, who started in Bata and went on to train in Spain, was known around the world as the Black Picasso. He even shared a friendship with Picasso himself. His unique creative sculptures and paintings are now in museums and galleries across the globe, and he was even nominated as an ambassador for peace by UNESCO in 2007. But shifting gears to something delicious, let's talk food. Just like the culture, the cuisine is a wonderful fusion of traditional African ingredients and European, mainly Spanish, traditions. The key difference in dishes is often found between the rural and urban areas. Traditional dishes are dominated by hearty sauces made from local ingredients like peanuts, yams, and okra. While the meat of native animals like antelope or even crocodile is occasionally used, fish is the staple protein today. And if you're near the coast, you'll find restaurants priding themselves on freshly caught fish, often served charcoal broiled or in a spicy fish soup called pepper soup. In the capital, Malabo, and the largest mainland city, Bata, you see that Spanish influence clearly. Alongside African cuisine, you'll find European fare like paella and potato omelettes. And for drinks, you can enjoy the local palm wine, or malamba, which is distilled from sugarcane, or sit down with a warming cup of asang, an African tea. So there you have it, a full look at Equatorial Guinea. We've travelled from the initial Portuguese sighting, through colonial struggles, and a decades-long dictatorship fueled by oil, to a rich culture determined to preserve its traditional roots while engaging with the modern world. Now here's an interesting question for you. If you could step back in time to any moment in Equatorial Guinea's history, which era would you visit and why? I'm excited to read what you come up with. But in the meantime, if you enjoyed this video, you'll love this next one.